Now, I know that many of you have been very excited for this keynote. I even know one of you for certain decided to get tickets to see this keynote specifically. Josh Sawyer started in the games industry in 1999 at Black Isle Studios, where he worked on Icewind Dale games. Since 2005, he has been at Obsidian Entertainment, where he directed Fallout New Vegas, Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, and the 2022 narrative adventure game Pentiment. He is currently an Obsidian Studio Design Director. With a long and illustrious career in games, we couldn't look over Josh coming to tell us what it has been like to watch the industry change. With experience in new funding sources, mass-developed acquisitions, remote work, and the shift to digital distribution, Josh has truly seen it all. Prepare to reflect on the past 26 years with lessons learned. Where we've been, can't predict where we will go, but it may impart some lessons to prepare us for what's to come. Please welcome Joshua to the stage.
Hello. Hold on. I'm getting water right away. Oh, boy. All right. There and back again, one weird game dev trip. That's the worst title I've made for a talk, probably in recent memory. I'll be honest with you, I had some real trouble with this talk. I'll get into why, but looking back over the last 26 years, it was a rough trip. First, a little bit about me. My name is Josh Sawyer. I grew up in Wisconsin. That's a state in the northern Midwest of the United States. And I played and I made role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games when I was growing up. I also played a lot of computer role-playing games, games like Pool of Radiance, Bard's Tale, later Darklands, and even Fallout. Fallout was the last game I really played before I actually got into the industry. I went to school in Wisconsin. I got a bachelor's degree in history. I did not know what I was going to do with that bachelor's degree in history, but like a lot of my fellow designers, so many of the game designers that I came up with at that time actually had English degrees or psychology or philosophy or anthropology degrees. So a lot of people who didn't exactly know what they were going to do with their degrees, and they all became game designers. I started at Black Isle Studios in 1999. We were, at that time, pretty exclusively a PC developer. We were part of Interplay, but Black Isle made role-playing games and pretty much just PC role-playing games. I was there until about 2003 when things started going very not well for our parent company, Interplay, and it was time to go. But I did not go to Obsidian, which is where I am now. I went to Midway San Diego, and I worked on console games, and that was very different. Something I will say right away is that at that time, there was not a ton of crossover between console and PC development. It was more like arcade and console development, and it wasn't as common that things got ported back and forth. Obviously, that did change over time, but for me, it was a completely different environment to be in. I would not say it went great at Midway San Diego, but I did actually learn a huge amount of things that I still use in my career to this day. I left in 2005 to go to Obsidian Entertainment. A few months ago, I celebrated being there for 20 years, which is not common. I am, by my background, a system and narrative designer primarily, but I've been working as a game director since Fallout New Vegas, and I've been the studio design director at the studio for 10 years, something like that, which is kind of crazy. So what is this talk about? It is not actually about Mission Impossible, although I will say, because I was like, what movies came out in 1999, which is when I started. Mission Impossible 2 came out in 2000, but Tom Cruise has been making Mission Impossible movies for 29 years. That's crazy. Anyway, it's not about that. It is about game development in the early 2000s versus now. And the thing is, when I went back and looked at it, because I was trying to find sort of like hopeful messages, and it was kind of rough, because there are things that are better in the industry, but this is not a great state of things right now. Certainly not in the US, I would say even worldwide. I'm really not happy about the industry or the world. A lot of not great things going on right now. When I was a young adult and starting to get into history and studying history, I studied German, the history of the Holy Roman Empire, and German has a lot of really entertaining compound words that are very fanciful, and one of them is Weltschmerz, which means world pain. And It is, figuratively, it is, you have an expectation of the way that the world is supposed to be, you think it should be, and it's not. And that's the pain that you feel. I've been feeling a lot of that lately. Weltschmerz and Spielindustrie-Schmerz. The game industry is kind of in a painful state right now. This might seem crazy to people. I mean this completely honestly. In 26 years, I have never felt secure in my job. I think when I started in the industry, I didn't even think about it because I was very young. I was 23 years old and like, I didn't know anything. I didn't care about it. But once I actually started to think about the security of my job, I didn't feel secure. I've never felt secure. I've been a studio design director. I've been at one company for 20 years, and I don't feel secure. I would say, actually, I feel less secure now than I have in recent memory, which is kind of screwed up to think about. But that being said, I do think there are some good things. Some good things in the industry, some things that are actually better than they were, truly better, and hopefully we can hold on to those things. So first, the industry. So I was like, I said there and back again, that's The Hobbit. Lord of the Rings, sure. So yeah, the industry is much like Orthanc. First, I'm going to talk about the demographics, like what teams were like, what the people on teams were like in the 2000s. Please understand also that I am giving the perspective of someone who basically has just worked in Southern California for his entire life. In the early 2000s, almost everyone I worked with was in their 20s, like their mid-20s. The picture in here, this is the picture of the Icewind Dale design team. From left to right on the top, that's Steve Bacchus, that's me, Scott Warner, Chris Avalone, and then the bottom row is John Diley and Roy Tornado. John he always considered himself like the old man of the group. I'm way older now than John was in this picture, but that was kind of the vibe. It's like a bunch of young guys. When I say few women, I did not work with any female game developers for the first 5 years of my career, like none, zero. I worked with almost entirely white devs. There were some Asian devs. There were very few devs from other backgrounds. And there were very few openly gay or trans devs. It didn't mean that there weren't gay or trans devs, just that the environment was still extremely hostile to them. Demographics have changed a lot now. First thing I think it's worth noting, and this goes back to, by the way, I do want to say, the talks that were given by Jordan and Liz in the past 2 days, I think were amazing and kind of made me feel like crap. It's not on them, it's on me. But one of the things that came up, like institutional memory, for example, is that we have multiple generations of devs within a studio now over long periods of time. And so sometimes the stories that we tell don't get passed down through those generations. And so there are disconnects between those groups of people. We do have multiple generations of devs within studios, 3 generations, 4 generations. We have people into their 60s at my studio, and we have people that, there's a guy at our studio where he said when he was born, I was like, you were born when my first game came out. So that's crazy. There's a lot more specialists now on team. When I started, and granted this does depend on the team size, but when you have a small team, and especially early in my career, it was only small teams, everyone was a generalist. Everyone kind of worked on just one category of things, or even multiple disciplines. But now, especially on big teams, you'll get hyper-specialist people and fewer generalists. I just said that. There are a lot more women. It's a very good thing. The last project I directed, Pentiment, over half the team were women. Granted, that was only a team of 13 people, but it counts. Overall, there is much better ethnic and cultural representation. We're not done here, but this is way better than it was 25, 26 years ago. And there's also more worldwide participation. Some of this is that remote work and co-dev means that people from all over the world are participating in the global game dev scene much more. And I would say that the game dev community is generally way, way more welcoming to LGBTQ plus people overall. It's, again, not perfect. It is way better than it was. Where we worked in the 2000s, there was no remote work. I will give one short story. There is one guy that I worked with, his first job in the industry, everyone worked remote they would call each other on the phone, on a rotary phone, by the way. They'd call each other on a rotary phone that they would hold like this. If you played Cyberpunk, he makes fun of that. So they'd call them on the phone and they'd talk about what they were working on, and then they would work on it and they'd put it on a disk, and then they'd drive and they'd say, here's my work, and they'd put it together. But for most of us, we worked as one team at one physical location. Almost everyone on the team was a full-time employee. Some departments would actually rotate. So for example, if there were departments like UI or audio that, well, they probably did actually have work for the entire project, but they would be sort of like a service group that would rotate from team to team. How we work now. This is my home office. I don't actually work at my home office all the time, but I do sometimes. Remote work is still here. Hybrid is becoming standard. I think this is a pretty safe thing to say. COVID and remote work made this integral. Now, here's the thing. So we got a lot of people that are saying everyone's got to return to office, and we could debate that point, but the fact is, even after everyone returns to office, they're still using codev and they're still using contractors, which means that all the infrastructure and all the processes that you use for remote work are still in place. So practically speaking, hybrid is a part of especially large game dev. It's just not practical to go back to full-time in office. And also because our projects are so much longer, not all companies can justify full-time for an entire department for 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, and so those codev partnerships are becoming more modular. The use of contractors within teams is becoming more period-specific. Audio production, QA, and writing are often outsourced. So again, you will see these people that do things piecemeal out of office. Pay in the early 2000s. So I went and did a little digging on this. In North America, it was $61,000 US was the average salary then. I could not actually find exact figures. Game Developer and a few other groups would do surveys. It's kind of hard to get that data. I will say, though, it's all over the place. It's all over the place worldwide. On the West Coast, it went way up for a bunch of reasons that are not super important to go into. But again, this is one of these things that pushes codev and pushes contracting work remotely because, frankly, it is phenomenally expensive to employ a bunch of game devs in California, where I live. Something I did want to comment on because I care about it, and I think a lot of people in this room probably care about it, collective action and unionization. So Atari attempted to unionize in the mid-'80s, and it did not really go anywhere. When I came up in the industry, my grandparents were in unions. They helped form a machinists union, but unionization was never in my mind when I went into the industry. It just wasn't something that entered my thoughts, and I didn't see much talk about it at that time. Public knowledge of working conditions at that time was really quite low. Something very notable, I don't know if you remember that, I keep misremembering the date of this. It was actually 2004 when the EA spouse letter went out, basically about how crappy the working conditions at EA were. But that was sort of the beginning of like rumblings of people being aware of how bad working conditions were in a lot of places and starting to try to do something about them. So things have changed over time. Game Workers Unite in the late 2000s started. There were a lot of people that were involved in Game Workers Unite and trying to get awareness and talking about unionization. It didn't necessarily coalesce into anything solid. However, in the past few years, Code CWA in the United States has made inroads with several companies, and there are unionized workforces in the US. Of course, there's Game Workers Australia here, which came into existence, I think, 3 years ago. Many countries have stronger labor protections than the United States, which is good. The United States has very poor labor protections. Even when there are good labor protections entrenched in the laws, unions are still very valuable. Also, there's a way more scrutiny of working conditions among the general public, to the extent that the players care about this. Obviously, that varies from group to group, but it is good. That does apply pressure to employers to make them not be bad. So is that good? Well, I wouldn't say personally, from my opinion, that labor conditions are much better. They are somewhat better. Crunch is better. Crunch is not as common. Crunch was ubiquitous when I started. Not to be old man saying, like, we had it really hard in our days, because I think it's actually worse in some ways now. Burnout is way worse now, in part because projects are so long, and it can lead to such feelings of despair when you're working on something that feels impossible to overcome. So burnout, I feel, has replaced crunch as the main crisis kind of the industry. Job security is still very low. I mean, there are various numbers for this, but the most consistent ones I found is that since 2022, there have been worldwide 40,000 layoffs in the game industry. That represents about 10% of the global game dev workforce, which is pretty rough. So obviously job security is not amazing right now. Unions are not magic. I love unions. I want there to be unions. However, really all they are is a seat at the table, right? Like a union doesn't necessarily make magic things happen, but it is a way to get a seat at the table, because if you're not at the table, you don't decide what's for dinner. So let's talk about funding and how it worked and how it works now. This is me. This was October 19th, 2010. This was just shy of 15 years ago. This is at the launch for Fallout New Vegas. That was actually the last physical game launch that I went to, because none of the games I've worked on since then have had a physical launch. The only inconstant constant of the last 26 years is publishers. They're around. They have money. Maybe they will give it to you. Maybe they will probably screw you over in some way. So they've been around. However, a main difference is we primarily now deal in digital marketplaces, digital distributions through a variety of stores. All their pros and cons. They're kind of annoying, but believe me, they are so much better than dealing with physical retailers. You don't have cost of goods. You don't have to convince. By the way, the reason the Infinity Engine games, the Baldur's Gate, the Icewind Dale type games, those style of games, why they stopped being made, is because retailers told us, the game makers, no one wants to buy those games. We said, that's amazing. Where's the research that shows that? And they were like, trust us. But for real, because if the retailer would not buy your product into a store, no one was going, like it wasn't on a shelf, no one was going to buy it. So physical retailers had a lot of power. You had to convince retailers to buy your games. I think if you recall way back in the day, there was all this controversy about mature games, like whether it was GTA or whatever, and Walmart not carrying it or carrying it. That was the retailer actually telling the developer or the publisher whether or not they were going to carry their game. So that sucked. It is better now, I think. Also, launches in the first 2 weeks of the sale were critical because your boxes were taking up shelf space. And the more they took up shelf space and were not moving, the more the retailer, they had something called buyback, where they would say, okay, buy your games back from us, which is crazy if you think about it. But they had to make room for games that were actually selling. So there was this extreme, obviously right now it is still critical for initial sales and 2-week sales, but digital distribution gives us so much more control over those prices, those sales, bundles, all these things that were very nightmarish when we were just doing things physically. Crowdfunding, it's still here, sort of. So one of the great fortunes of my career is when things were looking kind of crappy around 2012, my coworkers, not I, had a great idea. We should do a Kickstarter game because Double Fine just did a Kickstarter and it was very successful. We could do that, and we had a big old conflict because my bosses did not want to do that. And I said, that is amazing. I'm going to leave the studio. And they said, hold up. And we did it. We did Pillars of Eternity, and that went very, very well. And we did Deadfire, and that did okay. But the point is, like, it was and continues to be a route for people to get funding. It is obviously not the same as it was 13 years ago, but it can be used as initial funding, and then you can have ongoing funding from things like early access. There are multiple avenues to get funding. There are grants, things like that. So crowdfunding is there. When we were looking up how much money crowdfunding brings in for games, what Kickstarter said specifically is in 2024, $22 million was raised for games, which is pretty good. Not as much as it was 12 years ago. But for tabletop games, $220 million. So dare I say, for the first time in my career, maybe it's a good idea to do tabletop games. Making games. This is my last Lord of the Rings reference. And I know it's not the Hobbit reference, but if you think about it, the ring is in the Hobbit too, so anyway. In the early 2000s, teams were about 15 to 40 people. Most of the research that I did showed this was the range that most teams operated in. There were discipline leads, so you'd have like a lead designer or a lead artist or a lead programmer, but there weren't really sub-leads. There weren't really sub-disciplines and specialization. There would be one or maybe two producers on a team because they just weren't that big. Everyone was pretty much a generalist. I started as a actually I should back up. I started as a webmaster. I started as a web designer, not a game designer in the game industry. I moved over, I did a sneaky thing. I worked on the Planescape Torment website, and then I was like, can I make a game? And then I worked on Icewind Dale. But I was a designer. I was a game designer. I wrote the design doc, and then I laid out the map, and then I set up the triggers and the scripts, and I wrote the dialogues, and I did the system design. That's not usually how things work now, unless you're on a very small team, but that was the norm back then. Some example games from the early 2000s, Metal Gear Solid 2, 70. Kojima, by the way, has kept very close to this, which I'll get to, so he's being crafty. Wise, in my opinion. Halo, 40 people. Grand Theft Auto 3, 23 people in Scotland. Hard to believe. All right, teams now. 1, 2, yeah. That's right. That's the noise I made. 6,000 plus, according to someone I'm going to mention later. This is how I keep you on the hook for the end of the slide. Really, though, indie and AA are kind of more like it was 26 years ago. The last game I worked on, I was burned out. I worked on Deadfire. As I said, it did okay. Did okay commercially, did not okay to my soul. And so I waited a while, and then I said, I want to make a little game. I want to make a game about history and art and things like that. And my boss was like, sure. So it started with 5 people, and then it went to 13. And 13, actually, by some standards, that's big for, by the way, it's not an indie game. I was part of a 250-person company. But it was a small development team, and everyone shared responsibilities, and no one was a specialist. So indie and AA are kind of more like developing back then, in a lot of ways. And remote work does allow for a lot of part-time or phase-specific work. So there are people that can come to the project for part of the project, and that's kind of just their job. That's the whole way they like to live and work. Like, I'm a freelance audio designer, and they hop in and they go, sound, sound, sound. They take off. But that's kind of like a normal way for teams to work now, I think. Contracting and co-dev are normalized. There are more disciplines, and there are more sub-disciplines, and there are tech artists, and there are tech designers, and there are all these like little tiny things, especially when you get onto big teams. And again, people can have those specialties. However, I do believe that generalists are always going to be very important to all teams. Yeah, so here are the examples. So Death Stranding 2, Kojima said he wanted to keep it to 150, but he couldn't. It went to 200. Still, that's pretty impressive. I think Death Stranding 2 for 200 people, that's good. Witcher 4 team, 440. And according to Rockstar, I think they said they have 9 studios and a total of 6,000 devs working on it. I guess if you have a dump truck the size of heaven full of money, then you can do that. So, dev cycles in the early 2000s. The first game I worked on was Icewind Dale. It was 14 months. It was basically a spin-off of Baldur's Gate, and so we took BioWare's tech and we were like, and 14 months later, it came out the same day as Diablo 2, by the way. Yikes. The second game was 10 months. By the way, it was originally supposed to be 4 months, and I told my boss, man, that's not happening, and he said, but we gotta. And I said, you can tell me I gotta put all this toothpaste back in a tube. That doesn't mean that it's gonna happen. So 4 months became 8 months, and then 9 months, and then 10 months. Grand Theft Auto 3, 2 3/4 years. Metal Gear Solid 2, 2.5 years. Diablo 2, 3 years. Diablo 2, 3 years. And at that time, 3 years, you're like, damn, 3 years, what a long time. That being said, we crunched like hell. And I'm not going to defend crunch, but to a certain point, crunch, you will get more done within a calendar day if you do it, and you'll burn people up in the process. But that everyone was crunching. Every team crunched constantly. So dev cycles now, Grand Theft Auto 6 is 6+ years. Next year, is it going to be the year? Let's find out. Everyone wants to know. Avowed, this is the last game that Obsidian put out. By the way, we do have another game coming out, Outer Worlds 2. But Avowed was 6.5 years. That was quite a long development cycle. Death Stranding, 5 years. That surprised me. But then I thought, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right, that did come out in 2000. Expedition 33 was 5 years. Baldur's Gate 3 was 6 years with 3 years in early access. That's crazy. Helldivers 2 was 8 years. I thought I was going to find some oddball in here that was like, actually, that was like 5 months. Like, no, these are all really, in general, everything is just a lot longer. Crunch still happens, but it's less prevalent. But like I said, burnout with these extremely long dev cycles is a lot more common. So there once was a shining kingdom called working remotely, or hybrid if you so desired. And yes, depending on where you are in the world, that has shifted. A lot of companies have said, you have to come back to return to office. And some people say, I have to take another job somewhere else because I'm not going to do that, which is good, because I think people should not accept that horseshit. So in 2000, when we were all in office, you always had to deal with everyone's bullshit. Like, you saw that picture of us, those fucking dweebs, constantly being in each other's faces, and we did get in each other's faces, but it was like there was no escaping it, right? Like, there was nowhere to go. It was just a small team in a small space. Everyone was in office, and it was, practically speaking, it was 60+ hours a week for a lot of the time. That being said, and I'm not defending it, but I will say it did produce a high esprit de corps. That's a Disco Elysium reference, by the way. Thank you all. But no, like, you did really vibe with each other. You got to know each other. You, like, you know, maybe didn't like each other, but, you know, there was camaraderie. You were always there with each other. A lot of people don't like it. I like it, but that's me. There's a lot of people that understandably really do not like it. It really drains them, and it's annoying to them, and they want to just work. That being said, fully remote work, it does impact socialization. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm not saying we shouldn't allow it, but I think we should recognize that sometimes it does have some negative consequences in some ways. And it can lead people to feeling very isolated. Like, I've had people tell me they feel very isolated, especially if there are not efforts made to kind of socialize and integrate them into the team in some way. It's still worth doing. It's certainly worth giving people the option of doing, but there are issues with it. Price points back in the day. This is something I think is quite recent that I think is interesting. So when I started, $50 and then a little later, $60, that was like US. I'm sorry, this is all in US dollars, I apologize. That was sort of the standard price for like big games. And the mentality often among gamers is if you were below that price point, then it was like, okay, that's not a real game. Like, or like it's not like a big game or like a cool game. But now that things have crept up, this is a weird, perverse, inverse thing. So prices went up, and nobody has any money to spend. Like, people are just, so when you say, hey, this game is coming out, it's $80, they're like, are you for real? Maybe there's another game I can buy that does not cost that much. And I think it created space. And there are amazing games, some of which are made right here. There are amazing games that are $20, that are $30, like huge games, very popular games. That's great. I think that has created space where I get, and I don't want to knock AAA, well, maybe a little bit, but it's very appealing. It's very flashy, and obviously, like, they're the big games that get a lot of advertising, and I've been there momentarily, New Vegas, whee, and then descended. So it's cool, but the thing is, like, now indie games and AA games, I think, are just as cool in a different way. And I think that's great, because not everyone can work on AAA games, and I would say that maybe should not, because it can be rough. So I'm actually glad that this has shifted and the mentality among the public has shifted. I think it took a good like 5 to 10 years for AA to become something that people were like, that is actually just cool and valid, and I understand what that means. That's good. What does it all mean? Why are we still here? So despite all the damage, according to charts that I've seen, games are bigger than ever again, baby. Like, we peaked in 2020, and then no one in this room's fault. It all cratered, and then a bunch of people who are also in this room probably suffered for it. And then people touched grass, and then they started playing games again. They're like, the grass is itchy, I want to go inside. So the fact is, like, the unfathomable scale of AAA, like these, it's very frequent now that we hear about, like, Ubisoft teams are 1,000 plus devs, or, the God of War team is, like a zillion. I don't know. It's the population of Earth. I don't like but it's hard to fathom how you even work in a team like that. But that isn't the reality of most devs, and also it doesn't have to be. That doesn't need to be something that people aspire to. Funding has changed. Publishers are going to keep doing this thing where they kind of are like, here's money. Oh, wait, no money. How about if you give us a completed game and then we give you money? It sucks. That's the way they've always been, and they're going to go through these cycles with the economy. But, there are other sources of income and revenue. Gaming is more socially integrated than it was before. When I started in the industry, and again, this was, the very end of the 90s, we were still being blamed for like every violent thing that happened, and like we were a social decay in the world, and we were making toys. We were making toys for kids, but toys for kids that were making the kids violent. I don't think that's really, like, every once in a while someone tries saying that and everyone says shut up, because it's super socially integrated. Tons of people from all ages play games now. Our audience is more diverse than ever. It's a huge audience, and it's people who come to games for all sorts of different reasons, from all sorts of different backgrounds. And our teams are more diverse. We have a lot more diversity in age, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality than we had ever before. So, how do we survive in all of this? This is one of my favorite lyrics from a theme song in a video game, by the way. Adapt. I know it's such a corny thing to say, but like, this stuff just keeps changing, right? Like, in 2010, I directed Fallout New Vegas, and there were things that happened with that. But like, we felt like we made a big game, and then we had a big game canceled, and we had the worst layoffs that we ever had. We had 40 people laid off, and it really sucked. And then crowdfunding happened, and we pivoted to that, and we got through it. And in some ways, like, I won't take credit for this, but my boss will say that, Pillars helped save the company. But that was only possible because we were like, dude, we got to do this. So find a way to adapt, because things just keep changing. I would say it's important to broaden your expertise. If you've primarily worked in AAA and find yourself pushed out of AAA and into indie or AA, those are the spaces where being it's not that expertise is not valuable, but you kind of have to do a lot of different things. When I worked on Pentiment, I was doing a lot of stuff that when I'm directing huge games I can't do because I don't have the time, but there was a necessity. I had to do things myself with everyone else on the team. So broaden your expertise. Learn subdisciplines that are adjacent to yours. Learn entirely different disciplines. There are people that I've worked with who started as programmers, they became narrative designers, artists that switch over to area design, things like that. So I would say broaden your expertise. It'll make you more flexible and able to adapt. Codev and contracting, they do open possibilities for part-time and remote work. In the United States, full-time employment is tied to health insurance, which is crazy, but in civilized parts of the world, you might be able to get health care from other sources, and maybe you can work a little bit for one company and do something else, or a little bit for a couple of companies, and that's a way to get by. Not just get by, but actually do very well for yourself. And maybe that's the way that you want to work. I know people who worked full-time in office and then were forced, more or less, to become codev workers or contractors, and then they said, actually, this kicks ass. Like, I can live by my parents, I can own a house that's way nicer than what I could ever afford in California, and I just get to work on a lot of different stuff, and I love it. I would say small and mid-sized teams are more viable than AAA. We're seeing a lot of AAA games that are, huge budgets, huge amounts of time, huge teams, and if they don't do unbelievably well, they fall flat on their face. And it's not the dev's fault, it's just like they're huge gambles, and it's really rough. And I really think, honestly, I'm not saying it's great, but I'm saying that I think small and mid-sized teams are probably more flexible and nimble and more able to kind of get through these difficult times. We'll say believe that your audience exists and find them. This is hard, but like, for the last month, I've been playing Solium Infernum, which, yeah. I didn't know the game existed, though. I love Satan. Like, so like in college, I studied the history of witch hunting. That was one of the things I studied in college. And of course, you get demonology in there, which is really fun. And so I was like, where did this game come from? And then I found out it was a remake, but I'm like, this is super cool. But I think discoverability, right? That's like, there are so many games, and there are so many good games. And there are so many, like Jordan on Monday was talking about indie survival horror. And like, there's a lot of games in that. So how do you stand out? You kind of got to try to find the people that are your particular freaks. And they're out there, there's a lot of them, and if you can find that audience and you understand the size of that audience, like what that capacity is, like you do have to be a little, crafty about it, but if you find that audience and cater to them, they will pay you back for it. Believe your audiences, like I made a game, I shouldn't over-exaggerate, I directed a game with a great team that was for art history majors. And that's a really narrow audience, And we found them, though, and they got super into it, and they were super enthusiastic, and the rest of the gaming populace said, no, thank you, I don't like that. By the way, I will say, one of the most annoying things that I heard in every review for Pentiment was, now this game isn't for everyone. No game is for everyone. Yes, but like, you're making a game for someone. You're making a game, hopefully for yourself a little bit, at least a little bit, but also for other people. So find those people and make your game for them. And I will say, feed your audience's hunger for more. Now, this is a little bit of like cart before the horse maybe, but I talked to a number of people about a month ago where they have relatively small companies, but they have a passionate fan base. And all the physical good stuff that I think I was talking about before, like merch, and it's not t-shirts, by the way, they all said t-shirts are not the way to go with merch, but whether it's like comics or soundtracks or other like little things, your super fans, deluxe editions, they will pay for those things. Even after the game comes out, you can make new like deluxe editions and sell them to people. And I'm not saying it's logistically easy or you should try to handle it yourself, but when you find an audience that's passionate and they want to support you, you can do it yourself. You can partner with people to like keep that going. Games can have very long tails now, especially in the AA and the indie space, because they're not about the cutting edge graphics. They're about a very cool specific experience. So cater to that. Second part, how to survive. So when I started, all the advertising was print, and it was all in gaming magazines. They don't exist. There's no games journalism even anymore. It's really rough. And so the fact of the matter, even if you don't like it, is that social media is kind of where communities exist and talk about these games. So you have to find them there, but those are very treacherous spaces. This is important advice. So there's people who either are professional haters or they are the audience of the professional haters, and you cannot make them happy. Stop trying to make them happy. Like, you can have haters that give good feedback that you genuinely think like, you know what, you hate my guts, but that's a good point. That would actually, I see that, I've been seeing that my whole career, people that absolutely just hate me. But every once in a while I go like, that hater, they really made a good point about the spell. But then there are people that like, it's bad faith. Don't give air to them. Like, they're not gonna suddenly like your game. They were never gonna buy your game. They were never gonna buy your game. They're existing to hate you. And don't give air to them. So like, you have your audience, find them where they are, but like, don't give air. Don't try to engage in good faith with people who are acting in bad faith. I've seen a lot of people, it's because I was a moderator. I was a forum moderator for 25 years ago. Just don't do it. Please protect each other. I'm not gonna call anybody out, but like, when I see the haters come for a dev and the people who are responsible for protecting that dev go, because they think it's going to make those people happy, it doesn't, and you just fucked over one of your teammates. Do not do that. Please protect each other when the bad times come. I do think it's important. Again, I'm not going to stand here and say everyone should return to office. I don't think that's good or healthy for anyone, but I do think it is important to find ways to socialize, and there are lots of ways to do that. At Obsidian, we have on my team, we have movie nights, and we start with things that are very thematically relevant. Like on Pentiment, we watched Name of the Rose. It's very relevant to the game we're making. As the years went on, we were like, what about Black Death? What about Monty Python and the Holy Grail? Like, but the thing is, as time goes on, it matters less that it's super relevant to what you're working on and more that it's a social occasion for people to get together and just kind of shoot the shit and like watch something together. We did museum field trips. We went to the Getty Museum. We've done camping trips. By the way, get waivers, liability waivers for all this stuff. But make it a part of the work day. Don't ask people to spend their own free time doing this. Make this a part of like, this is part of work. But finding ways to socialize when you're apart, it does help, both to avoid that sense of isolation and also just so that you understand each other better. It does help in how you work with each other. There's been a lot of, I think in game dev, there's been a lot of conflicts in the last 5 years, especially like about generational differences. You know, I'm not the oldest generation working in games, but I'm close to it. And I'm very online though. So I have some advantages in talking to younger devs, but like different generations are going to have different values. They're going to have different goals with what they want to do with a game or with a career or with life. And that's good, and you have to understand that and like process that and figure out how to accommodate. If you all want to work together, you got to figure it out. So don't, especially if you're a senior dev or a lead dev, don't dismiss, you know, younger generations because their values are not the same or they didn't come up the same way as you. I am glad that people don't crunch constantly in every game dev job. That's good. I should not like go like, well, you didn't even have it like bad as I, like nobody cares. Just shut up. Like, you know, so understand those things and also all the other social differences. Like, yes, there is a great benefit of coming from different backgrounds, but then you actually have to work with people, and that's going to cause conflict. Conflict isn't bad, but you do have to work with it and work through it. And I do think this is something that over time, like, you know, I came from a background of PC games, and PC games were really demanding in terms of like, you need a lot of manual dexterity and you're doing like a lot of this, and it's really math heavy, and there's a ton of reading, and if you can't read the text on the screen, fuck you, get glasses. And, you know, it was very sort of hardcore and off-putting, and over the years, like, that's not good for anybody. And I will say, like, over time, with this recognition that, I mean, I'm colorblind, and one of my biggest frustrations in my career is that nobody thinks about colorblindness, or when they do, they don't ask. Like the number of times I've seen a colorblindness filter in a game that is actually a simulator of colorblindness. And I turn it on, I'm like, that's worse. Like, it's worse for everybody. Like, why would anyone use this? Big companies have done this with major releases, Diablo 4. But you know, it made me think of like, if I have to deal with this, there are other, you know, and it shouldn't take that, but like other people are dealing with this. People, I went to Gamescom in Germany. By the way, Jordan made a great point about going to conventions and conferences is very expensive and time consuming. Going to a few of them though can be very helpful. You got to figure out the right ones to go to that are really going to make a difference. We did all this work for people with vision issues to play Pentiment. It's a text-based game, and I saw a guy in line at Gamescom, and he had, I'm not joking, like the thickest glasses I've ever seen in my life. And he was in line looking at his phone like this. And I said, oh, fuck. And he got up to play the game, and he was right up on the screen, and he was still having troubles. And I was like, oh. Because, you know, like, I thought, like, we had put all this effort in and we had done the right thing, but, like, we hadn't actually had someone with vision problems play the game. And, like, you know, when you actually see people interact with it and you see the problem, and we changed the game, and it became a lot easier for people to play. So accommodate those different capabilities as much as you can, and again, you're including more and more people. Think about it early. The earlier you think about it, the easier it is to accommodate people. If you do it at the end of development, it's going to be a big nightmare. But it does, like our audience is huge, and there's lots of different people, and they're all coming to it with different cognitive and physical capabilities and desires, and we can't support all of them, but we can support a lot of them. So that's my advice. Thank you.